So hello again, everyone. I was watching the video that's on YouTube. It's been very popular of when Bono meets Eugene Peterson, who did the Message translation of the Bible. That is a really cool video. Check it out. I wanted to say something about Eugene Peterson, the Message, and just Bible translation in general that I think is super important. It's going to be hopefully interesting for everybody. So here's the thing. The Message Bible was awesome when I found out about it, and it helped me a lot, especially to read the Old Testament. The Old Testament can be kind of thick to read, and that translation makes it super easy, puts it in plain language, and it was great. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, there's a particular passage that is translated a certain way in the Message that I think throws off the meaning. And this is like, okay, so let's talk about Bible translation to begin with. How do we know that any translation isn't throwing meaning off from the original? Well, I mean, it's tough. We roll the dice. We're doing our best. But when we know certain things are not translated as well as they should, it's still good to point it out. And I don't think we just need to throw up our hands and give up hope, that everything was just wrong or that it can never be correct. And I mean, it takes a little bit of work maybe, but this is life. This is what we got. So here's the thing. In Matthew 25, there's this parable about, let me say real quick. The thing about Bible translation in this particular, in the Message, in this passage I'm going to bring up about that Eugene Peterson translated, the thing is sometimes our theological viewpoint will be put into how it's translated. And in this case, I think maybe Mr. Peterson did this. Not that he did it intentionally. This is just how humans operate. But the good thing is we can go back to the original Greek. We have it. And those are translations of other Greek, whatever. It's fine. We're doing our best. But just hear me out and see what you think. So here's the thing. In Matthew 25, there's 3 parables. And the middle parable is about 3 servants of a king that were charged with investing money for the king. And then the king comes back eventually and asks them how they invested their money. Now, traditionally, this passage is taught in evangelical Protestant circles, as in, God wants us to do good things with our life, invest good things as Christians with our lives, and then, God will more or less hold us accountable, ask us how we did with how we invested our life. And it's about our actions and what kind of work we did for God and stuff like that. This is how this is traditionally taught in evangelical Protestant circles. Now, in the NIV, you can go ahead and read the whole parable. I'm not going to, but there's 2 servants that do invest the money well, and the king rewards them. And then there's a 3rd guy who buries the money in the ground, doesn't do anything with it, and then he is very, very harshly scolded and punished by the master. When the master comes back, he calls him lazy, whatnot. Okay, now, the lazy guy who just buried the stuff in the ground, when the master comes back, they have a conversation. And the master asks him, why did you do what you did? And in the NIV, which is a kind of like direct to Greek translation, it goes like this. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. Okay, that's the NIV, which is like a more direct translation to the Greek. Now let's read it in the Message. The servant given 1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways. that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. All right, so in the Message, this is the thing. There's no mention of this line from NIV. Like, the translation's completely different. In the NIV, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. In the Message version, there's not even mention, like, it's completely different. Now, why does this matter? It matters hugely because in Eugene Peterson's Message version, I think he has gone along with the theological assumption in our individualistic society that this passage and this parable was said by Jesus and was meant to us as individual Christians, of how we've invested our individual lives with what God has given us to do. That's how this is traditionally taught. And that is reflected in his translation. But in the NIV, it's super puzzling. What the hell does this mean? You're a hard man, and you've harvested where you have not sown and gathered where you've not scattered seed. Well, here's the thing. The Gospels and what Jesus was doing, and even what Paul was doing, say in the book of Romans and stuff like that, is bringing Gentiles and the Israelites together because they were divided. And this was the struggle of the Old Testament, was the survival of the Hebrews against Gentiles that were the tribes around them that were always enslaving them and beating them up and exiling them, and threats to their survival. So it's also good to know that God originally charged Israel. This is the biblical story that people don't know. People think that the Bible, the Old Testament story, is this tribalistic story of these Hebrew Semitic people who have God on their side, and they can thrash anybody they want because God's guaranteed their survival. And that is the story, and it's just this tribalistic, normal, human, somewhat horrific story. But what is actually happening in the Old Testament is that God has charged this one tribe to be completely different from all the other people on earth, in the sense that they are to be giving, they're to be outward focused, they are to be welcoming, hospitable, invest in others as a community and a tribe. What Jesus in the Old Testament writers call a city on a hill, the salt of the earth. God has told these people to be completely different. God has charged them with not being self-focused, with not thrashing others so that they can survive. Jesus eventually wraps it up and says, love your enemies. That was the point that they missed. And the law is outward focused, that God charged them to follow the law and to commission them to be this tribal people set apart, which is what holy and sanctified and all these other biblical words mean that people throw around. It's about being different than just normal, crappy humanity. Now, that's a lot different than saying that the Old Testament is about God being on your side so that you can thrash everybody. It's not. That was absolutely the opposite of the actual point. Now, the story of the Old Testament is how much the Hebrew people failed in this commission to be a light on a hill, to be the salt of the earth. When Jesus shows up, he commissions, he gathers everybody on the side of a hill and he rallies them and says, we're going to do this right. And it's a super high standard. And it's what people call the Sermon on the Mount. And it's been Christianized, but that is not what it's about. Jesus isn't talking to us as individuals. He's definitely not talking to us as Gentiles. Now, this parable that Eugene Peterson translated, these 3 parables in Matthew 25, are they about us as individual Christians? No. They are about Jesus teaching parables to the Hebrew people specifically, and only to them, about the law and how they live under the law. These are parables about how they have either succeeded or failed, mostly failed, in their mission to be a light on the hill, to be the salt of the earth. And Jesus is critiquing them in the line of Old Testament prophets that critique the kings of Israel and how Israel's society was living. Jesus is also doing this in the highest standard possible, because he's God on earth that came down to be like, I gave you guys the law, let's follow it perfectly. And then when they fail so badly that they kill God, then it's this massive reversal and redemption story that a lot of people, like me included, are like, I don't think a human would make this up. This is too crazy. Okay, so this parable about investment that Jesus is talking about to the Hebrews under the law is about them investing in the commission that God had for them. Did they fulfill this mission that God had for them to love other people, to reach out to other people, to be hospitable, to love others, to love the Gentile tribes around them, to include the Gentile tribes around them and love them? How did they do in that? Now, the first two servants did well. They invested. And then God's like, okay, you have done the mission. You're good. The third guy, what this means when he says, when the third guy looks at God and says, you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed, he's talking about the fact that Jesus is making this massive transition of including the Gentiles into the family of God. Up until then, the Hebrews had ordered their society to be completely exclusivist and to try to survive and do like any other nation does, beat down others before they beat down you. Jesus came along, and the Israelites were under the Romans at this time, so they were being beat down. They were losing this battle. When Jesus came along, he was like, this is still the commission under God, under the law, to love others. And Jesus is preparing the Hebrew people, his people, to include the Gentiles in the family of God completely, in the original mission of God, commissioning Israel to be a light on a hill, to be salt of the earth. So this third guy fails in the mission because he does not invest, and he's mad that God is now including the Gentiles. That is God's harvesting where he didn't sow and gathering where he didn't scatter seed, is the fact that God is working in the Gentile nations. And this Hebrew person is mad about that. It makes sense in the history of the Old Testament in its entirety. This isn't about Christianity. It's not about us as individuals. It means something to us, but it's not how it's been taught in evangelical Protestant circles. So how did I come up with this translation, this meaning, this interpretation is what I mean? It's because the prodigal son, which is taught as a Christian Jesus parable to Christians, the prodigal son is about Gentiles and Hebrews. The Gentiles are the son that goes away and sins. That is how the Hebrew tribes viewed Gentile nations. The son who stays home, who's mad that God welcomes the Gentile son back home, is because he's mad because God didn't have the Gentiles follow the law. God wasn't involved with them. They viewed the law